budget estimates, and just to kind of keep us on track with what RCW requires us to do, next Monday would be the deadline by which we would need to be presenting the estimates, so we're tracking well in terms of our timeline. And then we'll be back on the 25th, at which time we will present the preliminary budget and not estimates. We're a little ahead because we actually have a draft preliminary budget, but it's not fully baked, so we're still at that estimate stage, but we are ahead of that 25th date, but that's the day that we'll be with you with the preliminary budget. And as you can see, it's due by November 2nd, pursuant to the RCW. The next slide shows the updated 2010 estimate, and I was going to have Paul just go over this slide briefly.
So this is laid out similarly to the slides that we showed you in July. This is 2010. This is the updated estimate. The total revenues at $9.8 million. The only change from July, and this is the additional $60,000 of the garbage tax revenue that RJ talked about earlier. The total expenditures, this is the operating expenditures, doesn't include the second supplemental, which really is a sort of an in and out kind of supplemental. So the roughly $10.5 million of expenditures, including the reductions that that RJ talked about, leaves us $650,000 deficit in terms of using reserves. But if you remember, $330,000 of that was fire impact fees, which are earmarked for the new fire engine that the city has purchased. So those were, again, restricted revenues that could only be used for that purpose, a one-time large expenditure. If you take that out of the equation, you're left with just over $320,000 in terms of the adjusted deficit. And I think there's still a few months left that, although the expenditures have been reduced, the budget's been reduced significantly, there's still an opportunity for those expenditures to actually come in less than the budgeted amounts. And so from a budgeted standpoint, that's what we're looking at, $320,000. It may very well be less than that. Looking at the cash reserves, starting out with a balance of $5.1 million, and again, as we talked about, this includes the general fund, the street fund, the fire fund, as well as the reserves that were transferred from the building reserve fund. The $650,000 is directly from above. That's the deficit, which includes the operating plus the fire truck. And then the transfer to the EMS restricted, this is what we talked about before. This is the $600,000 of accumulated EMS levy lid lift revenue that will be transferred out, leaving a general fund cash balance. And again, just to reiterate a comment on that, one of the reasons we want to segregate these funds is because if we don't, it impacts the metrics that we use and the analysis that we use on our general fund. So if we'd have left that $600,000 in there, it would have looked like we had more in discretionary reserves than you actually have. So what this does is it gets that number into a more of a discretionary number for council and management to look at, and that's a 39.3% of the revenues. And if you recall, we talked about the council policy being 16%, and so you're well above that. That 16% is about 1.6 million. You've got well in excess of that, as we talked about last time. Good position going into this, as well as all the work that staff, the mayor, have done to reduce the expenses. So.
And later on in the presentation, we'll discuss one of the handouts that was in the email we sent about the disposition of that reserve and what the proposal is moving forward in 2011. But for now, we'll jump back into our approach for 2011, and we'll talk about primarily now for this section of the presentation, the general street and fire funds, and on the revenue side. One of the first and foremost assumptions on the revenue side is that there are no new taxes. I'll just highlight at this point that based upon the most recent information, which is basically Thursday or Friday, from the assessor's office, the administration's budget was not going to propose anything around property taxes in terms of raising it. You know, we talk about the 1%, and should we bank it or should we do it or not do it? That conversation is something that you would have every year with your budgets. Because of the declining assessed valuation environment in which we find ourselves, there is nothing that the council could do, if you had been inclined to do it, around property tax revenue increase beyond, what you already have, because you're capped at your rate because of that assessed valuation decline. I won't get into the complicated explanation of all of that, just wanted a little placeholder for you there. We were initially not proposing anything around property tax increase, even the 1%. It turns out that, subject to that finalizing, of course, the preliminary information from the assessor's office is that wouldn't have been an option for you for next year anyway.
Just to expand on that a little bit, so your statutory maximum levy rate is $3.60 less whatever the library assesses. The library voters approved a lid lift to their full 50 cents, so your maximum is $3.10. Or what you did last year plus 1%, right? So when the assessor's office looks at those two calculations, it picks the smaller one. Your smaller one's going to be $3.10. So the last year plus 1% isn't really a viable option. You go to your decision tree and you're left with the $3.10. What David alluded to was the fact that you have this levy lid lift means that the assessor is keeping a second set of valuation numbers. So if that when that levy lid lift expires, they put in place that other, the 2006 brought forward number. So what we have to clarify with the assessor is whether or not there's any ability, whether or not desire, for you to take your bank anything on that sort of second lower number. And if there is the opportunity, then that may be coming back to you in terms of a policy discussion. But it would just be in that context. $3.10 is what you're going to get.
Have we quantified the dollar amount that we lost because the library levy lid lift passed?
We have a preliminary number we were discussing this afternoon, and it was less than $100,000.
84,000.
84,000.
Part of the issue is when the values go down, their old levy rate goes up. So, the combination of the larger than anticipated decline in assessed values, their old levy rate's going to go close to 0.5 anyway. So I'm not sure that, from their standpoint, they're probably not getting as much revenue as they had hoped. When we talk about your EMS levy, the same sort of thing. The good news is you passed your levy. The bad news is it's just barely, it's going to be a smaller increase over last year, over this year than you thought. The good news is it's being extended, but there isn't the additional revenue that I think the library was looking for. The short version is, assessed values go down, the rate will go up, and the difference between the 0.5 that the voters approved and what it would have been becomes smaller.
But that 84,000 is not an inconsequential amount.
No, it's
No.
not.
Nope.
We thought it would be higher, but it turned out to be estimated at that level.
Now I understand your comment. Thank you.
Just a quick question about this. Have we lost the ability, we had banked, the 1% from when we did not take the 1% in a couple of previous years, we had banked that ability to do so. Have we lost that now?
Yes. So what happens is your highest lawful levy is the $3.10 or this other number. The lower of those two numbers is now the $3.10 applied to your assessed value.
And that's the one that goes forward, not,
Right.
there's no memory of.
With the exception of what I